Excellent. Thank you, everybody. My name is Snehal Antani. I'm the co-founder, CEO at Horizon 3. Proud to be an external advisory member for the Action Institute. I'm going to talk today about the role of autonomous agents in offensive cyber and this concept of offense informing defense. And this talk very much comes from a practitioner's perspective. So when you look at my background, I started my career as a software engineer. So I graduated Purdue computer science, and then started my career at IBM as a software engineer in the middleware and distributed systems space. I did my grad school at RPI on distributed systems, and then was a CIO at GE Capital. So a number of typical CIO functions within my portfolio, and then moved to the Bay Area to be the CTO at Splunk, and then left in 2017 to serve within the U.S. Special Operations community as its first Chief Technology Officer. And it was my time at JSOC where I met my co-founder, Tony. He retired from the Air Force. I finished my service time, and then we started Horizon 3 together. And just a bit about kind of our roots and the underpinning of what I'm going to talk about a third of my company is former Special Operations, NSA, CIA type offensive and defensive cyber practitioners, and 2/3 are nerds and skinny jeans that know how to build, ship, and sell software. 80 million in venture capital raise, 130 employees, 1,300 customers across 30 plus countries. And last year, we were one of the best performing cybersecurity companies within our stage. So with that, what I'll talk about for this session is understanding the anatomy of an attack, talking about the role of AI and how that's going to accelerate attacks and lower the barriers of entry, and then the importance of community throughout all of this, and partially why I'm excited about the work being done by the Action Institute. So with the anatomy of attack, I'm going to start with the story. And the story is in 2022, the Japanese armed the Ukrainians or provided support to the Ukrainians. The Russians allegedly got upset and ransomwared a small manufacturer in Tokyo. And that manufacturer in Tokyo provided all of the cup holders to Toyota. And because of just-in-time logistics and lean manufacturing, Toyota had to shut down 28 production lines, and it cost them nearly $400 million in economic damage over cup holders. And the reality, or the flex, was not that the Russians could ransomware a small company. They knew exactly where to apply the least amount of effort to cause the maximal amount of pain. And what you realize as a CIO is that your attack surface is no longer just your own enterprise IT, which is on-prem, cloud services, SaaS services, and so on, but it is also the security posture of your suppliers and your distributors. So if I wanted to raise the price of avocados, I don't have to just attack the farm. I could go after the fertilizer component supplier or get trucks to get stuck at the border and fruit and vegetables to rot. And the point is, your attack surface is far beyond just your own environment now. The second part is this fundamental shift from extortion, which is really a CFO and cyber insurance problem. So as a CEO of a company, I look at ransomware as a cyber insurance issue, right? What's the likelihood of ransomware? How much are they likely going to demand for me? And do I have enough insurance to cover it? That fundamentally changes in this new world towards business disruption. Can that attack destroy my ability to manufacture vehicles in the case of Toyota? And so you think about it from a corporate standpoint as a very different type of risk going forward. So what I'll do is I'm gonna show you an example, and the example is nothing more than to show how an attacker would think and operate. So let's say that I want to cause havoc in the Midwest right before the election because that's where most of the swing states are, and I just want to cause economic harm. What I'm going to do is I'm going to target the manufacturing of Ford F-150s, most popular car in America. I don't know anything about car manufacturing, so I'm going to use ChatGPT as a Google search on steroids. And with the right prompting and curation and so on, you can pretty quickly figure out that, well, these are the top 10 components that an attacker could target in order to disrupt the supply chain. The semiconductor and electrical components, the transmission components, raw materials like steel and aluminum, the ECUs, and so on and so forth. Okay, it's a decent starting point. From there, I want to understand, well, what are the primary component suppliers to the Ford F-150 and to automotive in the Midwest in general? Lear Corporation, they provide all of the seating and electrical systems. has 169,000 employees. They probably have a decent cybersecurity budget. Tenneco provides all of the suspension and aftermarket components. 73,000 employees, probably a decent cybersecurity. And so when you think about AI for offensive cyber, you really want to break it up into two categories. The first category is what I just described, and what Microsoft and OpenAI and others talked about in the use of generative AI to conduct open source intelligence research on a target in order to do target selection like I just did, as well as using generative AI for effective spear phishing campaigns to gain that compromised credential in your initial access, or to research systems and protocols. And to be honest, while that's cool, that's not overly interesting to me as an attacker. What's really interesting is the role of autonomous agents that can attack, or in the good guys' word, that can pen test. And that's really what we focused on at Horizon 3. So we invented or brought to market the first autonomous agent for pen testing. In 2022, that autonomous agent was dropped into a bank that with no credentials, no knowledge, no cheating, no pre-scripting, and in 7 minutes and 19 seconds, conducted reconnaissance, built out a cyber terrain map, and successfully executed self-directed actions to become domain admin. And it took 7 minutes and 19 seconds to do that. In 23, as we continued to improve the algorithms, it took 4 minutes and 12 seconds. And now this year, we suspect it'll take sub 60 seconds. And the question is, in less than 60 seconds, can a defender detect the alerts, characterize the risk of the alerts, and actually do something to stifle the attack? And the answer is probably not. And therefore, if you extrapolate, the future of cyber warfare will be algorithms fighting algorithms with humans by exception. And if you take that as a starting point, we should expect a radically different architecture going forward, and this is why I get especially excited about the work that the Institute is doing. I'll pause there. Does that backdrop make sense to you guys when you think about the different forms of cyber? And on top of that, this concept of that I learned in the special operations world was stacked effects. You can do two different maneuvers independently, and you get 1 + 1 is 2. But if you synchronize those maneuvers, you get 1 + 1 is 3. And so if you think about an attacker, their ability to do highly effective target selection and then highly rapid compromise is a stacked effect. In that scenario, 1 + 1 is 50, right? And you're going to get a much bigger outcome as you combine those tactics together. So I'll pause there. Any questions, Shinan? Anyone else? Does this make sense so far?
Yeah, I am very interested into the task you are choosing here. What is the attack target here for your autonomous agent to look at?
It's a great question. Hold on to that, and I'll talk about technical objectives and the reward functions under the covers. That's a good question.
Yes.
All right, so let's kind of go on to the next part. What makes this especially difficult to solve, there are many reasons why this is hard, is go back to the market for a moment. So the blessing and curse of CISA emergency directives are that when a celebrity CVE makes it into the news, Ivanti is an example, and it becomes rapidly exploited in the wild, CISA will issue an emergency directive declaring there's widespread exploitation. What happens when they do that is every IT organization in the world has to treat this like an IT incident or an outage, which means you have to stop everything you're doing as a business, and you've got to surge all of your resources to assess, am I exploitable? If so, where? Have I properly fixed it? How do I prove to leadership that we're good to go? And when you look, and this is actually from the Verizon DBIR report that came in this week or last week, when you look at KEVs, within 30 days, 85% of those CISA KEVs are still not remediated. At 55 days, it's 50% are not remediated. At 180 days, 20% are unremediated. And these are KEVs that are declared to be widely exploited. And part of the challenge is that when you get a KEV in wide exploitation, time is the enemy. Because on average, about 7 days or less, every script kiddie to every nation state to every ransomware gang and so on has now looked at this, weaponized it, and is now using it as part of their attack. And so what you have to do as a CIO or a CISO is quickly understand, am I exploitable? Have I fixed it? Prove to my leadership that I'm good to go. And this has caused a significant amount of chaos in the entire process of running an IT shop, because of how often KEVs are now coming out. Because remember, it's in CIS's best interest to aggressively notify and declare a KEV because they want to make sure that they're properly notifying people. But at the same time, it is significantly disruptive from a business standpoint. And I think addressing this problem is going to become a really interesting problem set going forward as well. The next part is we over-rotate towards KEVs and CVEs in general, but that's not how attackers operate. If you look at over the last 50,000 pen tests we ran, of the top 10 techniques dynamically selected by our attack algorithms, only 9 out of 10 had nothing to do with vulnerabilities, with actual CVE named vulnerabilities. They were different types of tactics around brute force, credential dumping, man-in-the-middle relay type attacks, and so on. And only 1 out of 10 of using those CISA KEVs was selected. And when you categorize those, this is really a combinatorics problem. It's how do you dynamically select different types of weaknesses that could cut across exploitable CVEs, misconfigured software, dangerous product defaults, misconfigured security tools, like is your EDR properly preventing OS credentials dumping from occurring, to ineffective policies like your password policy, down to different techniques to harvest credentials from OSINT to compromised processes and so on and so forth. And it's a combinatorics problem of selecting the right weakness in the right sequence in the right time on the right machine to achieve an objective. And those objectives include compromising your domain, borrowing into critical infrastructure components like your VMware environment or F5 environment, compromising hosts, gaining access to sensitive data, so on and so forth. So when I started Horizon 3 and when we were building out the capability, for me, it was, this is a graph analytics problem at its core, but also it's a combinatorics problem. It's not a brute force, start with CVE 00001 and then enumerate through CVE 10 million and everything in between. It's how you're going to combine different classes of security weakness together. And as an industry, we tend to over-rotate towards the CVEs, but the reality is attackers have adapted and they focus on the other bullet points below that in that section. Does that make sense so far? Okay. So let's talk about this in practicality. So I'm going to walk through several attacks that were executed by us that are also attacks that you'd see in the real world. So this is a financial organization, I think. They had 5,000 hosts within their environment, so a mid-market, upper mid-market type company. They want to assume breach, so they assume the attacker can breach their perimeter, and they want to start a pen test or an attack on a single host within their network. So that's where they'll deploy that autonomous agent. That autonomous agent, Node Zero is what we built, that's our product, will conduct recon and enumeration and discover everything that's network reachable from that point. If it can defeat segmentation, it will. If it can harvest creds, it will, and so on. It then organizes all of that data into a cyber terrain map, is what we call it, which is really a knowledge graph. It's every host, port, service, credential we found, so on and so forth, and the relationships between them. Now, in this case, the customer had Fortinet installed, yet the autonomous agent, Node Zero, was still able to get code execution on a box. It successfully dumped credentials, and then it used those credentials to log in as domain admin on the domain controller. The question is, how did that happen? Fortinet, in this case, was installed as the EDR, but this is true for any EDR that's out there. It's easy to misconfigure them. The EDR was installed, yet the autonomous agent was still able to get code execution. And what happened was, out of the 5,000 machines, the EDR agent was misconfigured on 3 of them out of the 5,000. And the attackers only have to be right once. Defenders have to be right every single time. And then the question was, well, yeah, okay, I get that it was misconfigured on 3 agents and the attacker was able to gate code execution. But in that lateral movement, why were the user behavior analytics modules that look for credential abuse not triggered? And the reality there is, in this case, the customer didn't buy the right module. That's a whole nother reality of the world of what you're sold isn't necessarily what you think you have. But more importantly, a lot of these user behavior analytics algorithms that have been productized and brought to market require pristine logging data to build their baselines. And rarely do organizations have pristine logging infrastructure in place. Their logs are dirty, they're chaotic, they're noisy, and it becomes difficult for baselines to be created. And therefore, the effectiveness of these kinds of UBA algorithms is highly suspect. I'll pause there. Any questions so far on this example attack? Cool. Good use of your time so far? Makes sense? Great. The next attack is that attackers don't hack in, they log in. So a very common tactic is once an attacker gains initial access, they're going to start listening on the wire for NTLM hashes that are being passed from machine to machine. And really what this comes down to is LLMNR as a form of DNS that is often configured by default. And when you think about DNS, typically it's, I'm looking for host 2, I'm going to do the DNS lookup and I'm going to resolve directly to host 2. Well, in LLMNR and multicast broadcasting, instead of doing a point connection, host 1 will push out to everything on the wire, host 2, where are you? And then host 2 will come back and say, here I am, please connect. And then they'll connect and they'll start the handshake and go and so on. Well, man-in-the-middle poisoning in this regard is you've got a nefarious process on the network that is answering every multicast request that goes out. Host 2, where are you? And the malicious process can say, here I am. And then the handshake process starts, and part of that handshake is receiving the NTLM hash. And that malicious process will collect as many NTLM hashes as possible and then start to crack them. Very typical way to compromise. So in this example, we successfully grabbed an NTLM hash through DNS poisoning. From there, we're able to successfully crack that NTLM hash into its clear text credentials. And then from there, we're able to successfully find users on the network that had not yet set up their multi-factor authentication in Office 365. An example here is in Office 365, you can do a group policy that says everyone must have MFA, but until a new employee actually logs in and configures it, it's not set up. So attackers will sit there and look for changes of employees on LinkedIn and then target those employees in the first few days that they've joined your company because it's most likely they haven't yet set up MFA. With that, we're able to successfully gain access to the email system, the Outlook email for that particular user. And then once you've got access to the Outlook system, you can start to do lateral phishing and other types of techniques to start to permeate throughout the organization. When we did analysis of the NTLM hashes we had cracked across all of our customers, 80 on average in any given op, 80% of the hashes were cracked in 15 minutes or less. And this wasn't using any crazy quantum computers. This was straight up off-the-shelf GPUs. 6% of users on average had passwords based off the company name. 10% of service accounts, WebSphere admin, VMware admin, the user ID and password were the same. And then 26% of accounts had some sort of pattern. And then finally, if you're an IT admin in New England, you likely had a password something of Tom Brady is the GOAT. And if you're an IT admin in Atlanta, your password is something like 28-3 WTF, right? Or something like that. But what we found were regional behaviors of patterns based on local sports teams and so on and so forth. And so the reality is that attackers don't have to hack in. Often they're able to successfully compromise your credentials through a variety of techniques and then log into systems as domain user. Any questions so far? Does this make sense? Cool. The third out of 4 examples here. This is an example of a hybrid cloud customer environment. Once again, the autonomous agent is initiated on a single host as an internal pen test. That host discovers about 2,000 other hosts that are network reachable, including cloud assets. Within an environment, you've got a variety of specialty virtual appliances, HP ILO, Dell iDRAC, Veeam Backup and Recovery. And these are virtual appliances with custom operating systems that you're usually doing things like managing storage, servers, and that sort of stuff. Well, these virtual appliances tend to be difficult to install EDR agents on because they're custom OSs. They tend to be difficult to patch or easily forgotten. And they tend to be processes that have highly privileged accounts associated with them. So what an attacker is going to do is once the autonomous agent here has organized this data into that knowledge graph, is we fingerprinted HP ILO was running within the environment. And that is a juicy target to get after. So when you think about next best actions, should I go after the router, the printer, the television next? Well, if you see HP ILO, you go after ILO. With ILO, there are known vulnerabilities to get you code execution. And HP ILO stores all of its cached passwords in clear text in memory. And so as an attacker, you're able to get code execution and successfully dump the clear text credentials And now as an attacker, I've got a whole treasure trove of interesting user IDs and passwords. From there, we were able to successfully log in as a domain user to a neighboring machine. We were then able to pilfer the file system that the domain user had access to. And within that file system, we found a key store file that gave us production access to the AWS environment. We were able to get full domain compromise and full cloud compromise. And what's amazing here is two things. One, not a single human was involved in this attack, with no prescripted agents and no notion of what was happening. The second interesting thing is not a single cybersecurity alert and their SOC tools went off. And they had every Gucci tool you could buy because HP ILO wasn't being monitored, and everything thereafter was a compromised credential that didn't trigger any of the credential user behavior analytics rules and policies. It all looked like valid traffic within the environment. So what do you do about it? Step one, delete the key store file from a shared drive. You shouldn't do that. Step two, patch your ILO server immediately and try to observe it as best as you can. And step three, improve the observability of your highly privileged accounts. I'll pause there. Any questions on this attack story? Cool. The final story is a more generalized version of what ends up happening. So if you want to break in from the outside, and this actually encapsulates to some degree what happened to Microsoft a couple of months ago and many other organizations, is an attacker is going to start from the outside and go off and use LinkedIn, breach databases, and so on to identify likely credentials. So for example, I can go to LinkedIn Sales Navigator and find all of the employees at UC Santa Barbara or at Boeing or whatever. From there, I'm going to guess that your password is trobinson at ucsb.edu, or whatever it might be. And now I've got, say, 10,000 potential user IDs. All it takes is one of them to reuse a compromised Netflix password that can be found on the breach database as their company or academic login. And what I'm going to do as an attacker is password spray, credential stuff, and other types of techniques to find that one person that had a weak password or compromised password to give me initial access. Once I've got initial access and I've compromised a single domain user, most likely that domain user is local admin on their laptops, which means they can install applications on their laptop and so on. If you're a local admin, then as an attacker, I can dump SAM, LSA, LSAS, and so on, find those NTLM hashes, and then start to credential reuse by cracking hashes, reusing hashes to neighboring machines, and so on and so forth, like I'd shown previously. And eventually, I'm going to stumble onto a privileged enough account that leads to domain compromise. This is, for the most part, the MO of the bulk of the attacks that you see happening out there in the wild. There is no magic defensive AI button here. It's all about getting the basics. Do you have password policies properly implemented, or are they weak? Do you have local admin privileges properly managed or not? Are your Active Directory groups too permissive? Was your EDR properly configured to prevent OS credential dumping? So on and so forth. And in over 50,000 pen tests, not 26, but actually over 50,000 pen tests now, I had mentioned user behavior analytics tools never stifled our lateral movement. Certain MSSPs and SOCs took over 7 hours to detect and respond to the attack, which meant that it was a smash and grab. We were in and out before the SOC even could action the alert. And then finally, I mentioned it took 4 minutes in our fastest from start to finish to get domain admin within a financial institution. I'll pause there. Any questions so far? Cool. So I'll try to speed up a little bit here in the 27 minutes we have left. When you think about what's happening in the market using offense, using pen testing as a way to represent what's happening in the offensive cyber realm, what you see in the nefarious side of the house and in the pen testing side of the house is this evolution from manual consultants to marketplaces of crowdsourced developers to the attempt of automating attack. And automating attacks is an impossible task, and I'll talk about that in a moment, to this idea of autonomous attacks or autonomous pen testing or autonomous offensive cyber. Think of when IBM played Kasparov in chess a bunch of years ago. IBM didn't hard code 40 million chess games. They looked at every piece on the board and determined the next best action. You cannot automate pen testing or offensive. There are way too many permutations. And so you end up in this never-ending battle of trying to add the next permutation. It just doesn't work. And that's why there's a graveyard of compliance automation companies and technologies out there, because they just couldn't keep up with the permutations. When you think about that AI chasm, And the X factor of autonomous agents, like what we built, it's a graph analytics problem. And it's about designing decision algorithms that are MDPs, that are using wayfinding techniques, and that are continuously getting smarter through reinforcement learning, through shadowing infrastructure, through collective intelligence. And those kind of became the underlying architectural components of what we've gone off and built. So every time we run a pen test, we're collecting telemetry from the customer's environment, and we're feeding that in to our reinforcement learning mechanisms, and we're using these techniques to determine that next best action. When you think about shadowing, I've got version 1 of my attack decision. I've got version 2 shadowing in the background, no different than how Tesla FSD algorithms get swapped back and forth. And what decision did algorithm version 1 make? What decision did V2 make? Why was that decision different? And you use that as part of your training cycle. What's important in this world is, as you're executing autonomous attacks through autonomous agents like Node Zero, is you want to make sure you're safe to run against production systems. You want to make sure you've got the architecture in place where the more attacks are run, the smarter the system gets. And most importantly, you want to enable the end user to quickly test, fix, and retest, or what I call find, fix, and verify. Because it's that accelerated cycle of test, fix, retest that becomes the most important part of this experience. Any questions?
Snehal, yeah, can I ask you something? Sorry, Giovanni here. I was unfortunately stuck for the first 15 minutes on a much less interesting meeting. So I have a question. Are you doing this actively now, or it's something that you're proposing?
No. I've built a very successful cybersecurity company that does this right now today.
Okay. All right. So you're actually doing reinforcement learning analysis on your pen test.
Yep, exactly right. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail.
Okay, sounds good.
In fact, the next
Thank
slide.
you.
So when you think about a cyber terrain map or the knowledge graph, early on, the knowledge graph was not very dense, meaning nodes and edges per host, right? But the more we've evolved over the last 4 years, the denser these knowledge graphs have become, because the data model has become that much richer. Our recon and fingerprinting has become that much better, and so on and so forth. But these knowledge graphs underpin the core decision-making processes we have around our autonomous agents. And if you look, in 2023, we ran 26,000 pen tests last year alone, which is more pen tests than the top 50 global consulting firms combined. And we've now run more pen tests as a company than ever with every other company in its history, right? Over 50,000 pen tests total. And so, and we're going to probably 4x or 5x that number year over year in terms of total number of pen tests run. So in many ways, I'm a data company. Pen testing is just a sensor. When you look at last year, we generated 1.5 billion positive attack events, successfully exploited HPILO, successfully dumped credentials from Dell iDRAC, so on and so forth. But we have 5 or more billion negative events, attempted to deploy a rat, but it failed because of some context. The EDR stopped us, so on and so forth. By this time next year, we should be doing what we did last year per month, right? 1.5 billion positive events per month, 5 billion negative events per month. And what's important is the underlying process now of that data that we're collecting, how we do feature extraction, how we're doing the tagging, how we're driving that into recommendation engine evolutions, and then all the reinforcement learning that comes into play. And once again, the more attacks we run, the smarter we get, and the more training data we're accruing to allow us to build new variations of those autonomous agents. Does that make sense? Cool. The other thing to look at is back to like total number of pen tests. And actually, for the interest of time, I'll skip over this. So why does this matter? Why do autonomous agents for pen testing matter? Why does understanding offensive cyber matter for both good guys and bad guys? There is a fundamental supply and demand problem. You talk about the talent shortage in cybersecurity. It is the most egregious in pen testing. So there are only about 20,000 certified ethical hackers in the world based on looking for people with an OSCP certification. About 5,000 in the United States, about 1,500 in India. These are self-identified OSCP people. If you look down at some of these other countries, 120 for all of Sweden, 45 for all of Qatar. So it's extremely short in the broader, emerging markets, but it's still even a massive shortage just here in the United States. And it takes about 10 years to become a senior penetration tester. And that's after you get your certification, because it just takes repetition. And in the meantime, there's a significant growth in demand for security assessments between the increase in your attack surface, the increase of requirements through NIS2, DORA, GDPR, CMMC, so on and so forth, and the burden by cyber insurance companies and boards to verify your security posture. And the only way to overcome this supply-demand shortage is to find some form of force multiplier. In our case, it was autonomous agents for penetration testing, and that's really why I ended up starting the company that I started, and that's why we've got the success that we've got. But this is a problem that cannot be solved by throwing more labor at it. We have to think about a force multiplier solution that is autonomous agents. And by the way, we have the same issue on the defensive side. It's just not as extreme as the offensive side of the house. So with that, what you want to do in modern security companies that are actually good at security is they assume breach. They assume credentials are the new code execution. It's about harvesting credentials as the primary objective of an attacker, and that they should be pen testing as often as they're making changes in their environment. For every patch Tuesday, there should be a pen test Wednesday. And if you take that as a mindset, every time you make a change to your network, a change to onboarding new employees and so on, you should be testing your security posture. And what you end up in is this find, fix, verify type loop of finding problems that are exploitable, quickly fixing them, and then verifying that your tools were properly able to detect and respond. And the faster this feedback loop or this cycle, the more secure an organization. So when I think about the potential for autonomous systems, it's about enabling this workflow within the enterprise world, but in critical infrastructure and everywhere else as possible. And it's all about understanding the change in your exploitable attack surface over time. That's what I care about now as a CIO. How has my attack surface changed from the beginning of the year to today to understand, am I getting better? Am I getting worse? Do I have an ROI on the security investments that I'm making? So when you double click on that and you think about testing your security posture, first you think about technical objectives testing. Can the attacker achieve a technical objective, that is becoming domain admin, becoming a host compromise, getting a domain user compromise, compromising sensitive data, so on and so forth. So when you think about a Markov decision process, you have a reward function that is optimized or rewarding the decision likely to lead to domain admin, or the decision likely to lead to sensitive data exposure, so on and so forth. The next part is, once you've understood your technical objectives, you look at operational scenario testing. You run an attack from segment 1 and see if it can break out of that segment into segment 2. You take a compromised credential that was phished or whatever else, and you understand what could the attacker have done with the intern's credential. Could they have become a domain admin, or could they have accessed sensitive data? Are my security tools actually working? And then finally, you get into business scenario testing, which is, what is the effectiveness of my SOC or MSSP? Could my uptime be compromised? Could my information be compromised? Could the attacker gain persistent access? And you want to understand this every time you make a change. And that's super important. I'll pause there. Does what I talk about in terms of technical objective as incorporated into the reward function, does that make sense to you guys? Okay. And the way to think about it is, should I go after the printer, the router, or the television next? Well, that decision is based on discovered services, historical record of success, likelihood of achieving an objective, and the probability of being caught. And you take those as parameters to determine the next best action in the environment. The next part is, you don't want to run attacks from the same place over and over and over again. What you want to understand is your security posture from different perspectives. So if you take what happened with SolarWinds, that was a compromise that initiated in the management zone, and then the attacker was able to defeat segmentation and get into the data zone, the application zone, and elsewhere. And you want to assume that the attacker will gain access. Access could start in any segment, and you want to understand the blast radius from that segment to understand the impact to your organization. You want to understand how that blast radius changes over time. So if you take what happened with Caesars, it started with a domain user compromise, which then elevated to a service account compromise, which then led to compromise across multiple zones. And so you want to understand your exploitable attack surface from multiple points of view, and then how those points of view have changed over time. Does that make sense? Cool. And by the way, if you have questions, you can also post them in the chat, and we'll have time at the end to talk about it. So with that, let's talk about a practical example of a traditional organization. So this is a manufacturer based in the Midwest. The hardest part of a CIO's job is deciding what vulnerabilities to not fix. And the reason why is when you decide not to fix something, you have implicitly accepted liability for it. So if that is what is used by an attacker to compromise you down the road, you can be certain the board's going to come after you, you're going to get fired, and you could be held liable civilly. And so deciding what not to fix is a really big deal, and you want to prioritize problems that can actually be exploited. The next thing that matters is you want to make sure that your security tools are actually effective, and you want to use autonomous agents like Node Zero or pen testing as a sparring partner. And then the third is you want to be able to rapidly make sure you are not exploitable to the latest KEV that comes out. So our customers, what we see in the adoption of autonomous agents for pen testing is that customers shift from 1 or 2 pen tests a year to 40 or 50 pen tests a month, if not more frequently. And what you'll see is the more pen tests they run in blue, the more problems they find in orange. But they inevitably hit this inflection point where there is suddenly a rapid decrease in weaknesses per host that were found. And that inflection point is because the red and the blue teams stop hating each other, and they properly start to find problems, fix them together, and then retest to verify that the problem has been fixed. And that's what really represents this idea of purple teaming. And purple teaming is a culture. It's a relationship between the red and the blue team whose goal is to proactively secure the environment. Key to building that trust in purple teaming is, number one, understanding the difference of being vulnerable and being exploitable. So if you take Log4Shell as an example, Log4Shell came out about 2 years ago, and it was an absolute nightmare for every company globally. Well, the way Log4Shell works is an attacker is going to find publicly exposed web forms and web applications, and they're going to inject a well-defined JNDI string as the user ID of a login form. And then the web app is going to log that data in its application interface. It's going to log the data in Log4j, and then Log4j is going to evaluate that crafted string, and it's going to trigger Log4j to do an outbound connection to a malicious server. And then once that outbound connection has occurred, the attacker now has command and control and code execution within your environment. So when you think about that, there's 2 ways to fix this. The first way to fix it is to find every instance of Log4j jar file across your entire company, which could be hundreds of thousands, depending on how big you are. And those are only the jar files you can find. Log4j is also deeply embedded in VMware vRealize and other vendor products. You got to find them all, and you got to update them all. Or you could put a single egress control in place to prevent that outbound connection. Now, if you do the egress control, you are still going to be marked as vulnerable by various vulnerability tools. But being vulnerable doesn't matter. Can it be exploited? That's the question. And the answer is no. The egress control prevents exploitation. And that's the fundamental difference that I think we're starting to see emerge across industry, is the distinction of being vulnerable versus being exploitable, and the importance of understanding your exploitable attack surface. And the next part that's important is this exploitable? And the reason why is put yourself in the shoes of an IT admin. I think maybe some of you have had that job or will soon have that job. You may be asked to skip your kid's basketball game, skip your daughter's play, cancel your family vacation to patch Log4j. And you better be doing that because you have to, or you're going to be very angry as an employee. And I kid you not, that's what happened. Log4Shell hit right before Christmas, and all these poor folks had to come in and cancel their plans and fix it, even though they could have put a single network egress control in place and gone back to Christmas with the family. The second thing that matters is proof. there is this inherent skepticism now with any problem that's been found, which is, sure, I'm sure it's a problem. Prove to me that it's an issue. So as you think about an attack path, it's one thing to show the path. And this is a screenshot from my product, where the autonomous agent node 0 started on a single host. It conducted recon and enumeration and fingerprinted different services. It fingerprinted and discovered a misconfigured JMX server. It successfully got code execution and deployed a rat. From the rat, it successfully dumped SAM and grabbed an NTLM hash. And from there, verified against SMB that we had domain admin access. So because there are very few pen testers in the world, the primary user for these kinds of tools are going to be IT admins and network engineers that have no offensive experience whatsoever. And this is going to be true as autonomous agents become proliferated throughout the industry. The end user is not a security expert. And so the user experience and explainability becomes absolutely paramount. Here is the impact, domain admin. Here is the path for how we got there. And if you don't believe us, click on that host compromise. There's the command we ran, and there is the output of that command to prove we got code execution. So if you don't believe me, copy and paste that command yourself and run it against your environment, and you'll see that this is a real thing. And this is why false positives cannot even be a factor in the world of autonomous agents, because you've got to be able to show the proof of exploitation to buy down skepticism by the end user. From there, don't just tell me I have a problem. More important is tell me how to fix it. And this becomes super critical in any attack type system. Is, okay, here is exactly how you fix JMX misconfigurations that led to host compromise. You've got multiple options. Go. And as you fix them, the ability to retest to verify that you've actually fixed the misconfiguration in that JMX server. That's the end experience that will be required by anyone that is building and delivering autonomous agents for offense. I'll pause there. Does that walkthrough make sense to you guys? Cool. Okay.
Can I ask a very little question?
Sure.
So on this map which you displayed before, is the initial node, is it assumed to be vulnerable, or your system also generates this first exploit for this node, or it's just assumed to be vulnerable?
It's a great question. So what's important is there shouldn't be any cheating. So in this example, the autonomous agent runs as an unauthenticated user in an isolated Docker container on that host. That's it. And then from there, it gets an outbound network connection to command and control services in the cloud. But it doesn't use anything on that host because that would be cheating. You assume that host has been compromised, and from there, what could happen is how we do it.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. So let's kind of rip through a few more things here. And I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit slower than expected. In fact, I'll do something here. So the next part here is, are my tools actually working? So when you think about the ability to load a rat on a box, remote access tool on a box, the number one job of an EDR, whether it's CrowdStrike, Fortinet, SentinelOne, or anything else, the number one job is to prevent rats from being deployed. Then it's to, if it has been deployed, to prevent it from dumping LSAS and other critical processes. Like, that's the only reason why you buy these technologies. If we successfully deploy a rat, the number one question is why? What happened? And when you look, this is over a 2-week period of time, we attempted to install 553 rats over a 2-week window back in November. About 60% of them, so 333 out of 553, we successfully installed the rat and dumped SAM. And we got caught 220 times. Of the 333, we then successfully dumped LSA. We got caught 19 times. We then successfully dumped LSAS, got caught 3 times. Or sorry, the math doesn't work, but you get the idea. And then we successfully dumped telemetry or provided telemetry and got caught 68 times. And so at the end, what it worked out to be was 30% of the time we successfully defeated the EDR and dumped SAM, LSA, LSAS, and got telemetry. And these were against the top 3 EDR products out there in the market. And the reason why is not that these tools are bad. It's that it's very easy to misconfigure them and not tune them properly and miss that checkbox for OS credential dumping and so on and so forth. Does that make sense? Cool. So what's important in autonomous agents is an audit log. Here is every command that was executed. Here is the timestamp it was run, the IP address it ran against, the mapping to various MITRE tactics. And the question you want to ask as a defender is, did we as a defender detect it, log it, alert on it, and stop it? For instance, at the bottom here, the autonomous agent, Node 0, was able to dump credentials from vCenter. Splunk, what did you see? CrowdStrike, what did you see? Why did you not detect this? What happened? What was my blind spot? And it's this sparring partner behavior that's critical to actually improving the security posture of an organization. When you, as I wrap things up here, when you think about the kind of the future end-to-end workflow, what I believe it looks like is you've got threat intelligence, and threat intelligence is not just writing blog posts, but it's writing exploit content that can be fed or added to an autonomous attack engine. That autonomous attack engine's goal is to find those exploitable attack paths and gaps in various controls, which then help you to prioritize improving your defenses, your automated remediation scripts, your logging scripts, your monitoring, your alerting, which then should help accelerate incident response. And that becomes the feedback loop that ties this workflow together. And that all of this needs to be underpinned by those cyber terrain maps and the knowledge graph analytics that I talked about earlier. And this is what we went off and kind of pioneered as a company. The next part of this that matters is thinking about the importance of ecosystem. So when you think about ecosystem, I think about it as a very difficult part of building attack content is you don't have access to the specific VMware product at the specific version for you to go off and build the exploit. So there's a huge issue around getting access to cyber ranges to build end-day exploits against a particular piece of software. And now you're at the mercy of IBM making it available to you or finding it through other nefarious means that are out there. The next thing is you want to have a space where you can actually benchmark the effectiveness of autonomous agents. Because just like you have an OSCP for humans, what we need now is the OSCP equivalent for autonomous agents to measure and benchmark the effectiveness of those agents. You then want to have common library of different misconfigurations and so on in order to be able to improve defensive actions. The next part here is the remediation repository. How do we maintain fix actions for things that have to be resolved in a way that lets the community get better? How do we go off and actually build detection engineering repos and indicators of compromise repos? Those right now are tucked away in individual GitHubs of individual Twitter influencers. And then finally, how do we get into production safe source scripts that are maintained at a community level? This is something I think like the Linux Foundation or other organization could be great at. So I'll end with two things. The first is, when I think about offense informing defense, this is how I see the world evolving. Autonomous pen testing and those knowledge graph analytics and the attack paths that were identified are an input to some sort of defensive analysis and orchestration. In that the defensive analysis and orchestration is really focused on 5 knobs and levers. Creating, destroying, and recreating environments, ideally that are ephemeral, being able to logically isolate a workload, being able to provide as needed access or revoke credentials that are compromised and so on, and dynamically improving or changing observability based on likelihood of leading to a compromise, and ensuring that every aspect of the system is private. And there are a set of APIs you can envision for any one of these that can be surfaced for an offensive agent to help manipulate in order to improve the defensive side of the house. And my last slide here is, gone are the days where you can run a vulnerability scan, run an annual pen test, run a tabletop exercise, and think that you're secure. Those days are over. Don't tell me we're secure, show me. Then show me again tomorrow, and then show me again next week. Because the adversary has a vote, and my environment is constantly changing. And if you want to do security right, it really requires these underlying principles. You have to assume breach. There's too many doors and windows. You've got to understand and continuously improve your reaction time. And you've got to understand and continuously reduce that exploitable attack surface. So I'll end there. I hope this was a good use of your time, gave you some ideas. We've got it recorded, which is outstanding. And we ended right on time. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Snehal. Hey, unfortunately, I mean,
Mhm.
of course, I have a 2 p.m. Meeting that I have to run to. But before I run, I want to steal 1 minute of your time with a question, which is, I mean, when you say that it's important to reproduce these attacks and make sure that, a new CV comes out, maybe it's vague, doesn't have a real exploit, we want to have something that allows you to really replicate that CV, maybe extract, TCP dump or even man-in-the-middle HTTPS in order to build signature, build detection capabilities, so on. So what do people do in industry right now to create this reproducible databases? I mean, what kind of technology? Do you use Terraform? They bring a bunch of hosts up. Do they use containers? Because sometimes they have Windows mixed with Linux. So all this is hard. And
So you kind of go back to what is the architecture of a cyber range? So for instance, our cyber range is Ansible scripts, containers, and VMs that can be pulled together and stood up. So that's a pretty good way to get a functioning cyber range up and running. Whether it's Ansible scripts or Terraform scripts, they're all the same. And so that's how we do it. And we've got a very robust cyber range. We can quickly spin things up, different types of configurations, different types of settings. And if you are really good at managing infrastructure as code, you want to have lots of different variations of configs that you can quickly wire together. Where this breaks down, however, is in more exquisite things. Even if you've got digital twins, it's super hard to truly replicate the nuances of PLCs or submarines or fighter jet IT systems. And I would love to buy a fighter jet to hack. Not sure I'm going to be able to afford one anytime soon. And so I think the cyber ranges for traditional IT systems is using the technology that you've described, but a huge gap in the market is cyber ranges for trusted researchers that go after more sensitive things, self-driving cars, critical infrastructure, water treatment facilities, energy production, so on, military equipment, so on and so forth.
Awesome, thank you. And I want to talk to you more about it. So I will hit you separately. We'll take it offline. Sorry, I really have to go. I have a College of Engineering executive committee, whatever. I gotta go. Bye.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. And I hope this gives you time. Find me on LinkedIn. I've got a lot of my stuff recorded and posted as well. Reach out. I live in the Bay Area, so I can get down to Santa Barbara pretty easily. I can get over to Berkeley pretty easily. Purdue alumni, so I always find a reason to get out to the Midwest and elsewhere. So looking forward to meeting you guys in 3 dimensions sometime soon.
Great. Thank you.
Snehal.
Yeah.
All right.
Is it possible still for me to ask some questions? Like,
yeah, why don't you? I've got to jump to call too. Why don't you, if you don't mind, just shoot me an email with your questions.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much.
See ya.